Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to GoldwingDocs. I have two items here. This is a relay. This is a 7-volt regulator. These are items that I have sold on my GoldwingDocs website for years and years and years. In fact, the 7-volt regulator I think I've been selling for over a decade. I have sold literally thousands of these. In fact, relays I've sold tens of thousands. So there are tens of thousands of my GL1500 relays in GL1500s all over the world. And the reason I did that originally with the relays was because the Honda relays, they were charging like $30+ for them, and there's 7 relays in there and they fail. The ones they put in there are 20 amp and they're just barely good enough for the application. They tend to not last, and after a few years they just burn out, the contacts burn out, and then you have to buy a new $30 relay. So I thought, well, I'll go right to the manufacturer and buy them direct and then turn around and pass on the savings to the Goldwing world, which is exactly what I did until Honda decided that, hey, you know what, that's not okay. They called the manufacturer, said, no more selling those relays to anybody but us. So next time I tried to place an order, they said, sorry, no longer available. What I did is I went to a different manufacturer. Actually, I went to about 4 or 5 different manufacturers until, and I had them all send me samples and pulled them apart and tested them and found one that was really well built, and that's this one. And I've been selling this one now for 8 years, 9 years. It is a 40 amp relay, so the contacts are rated for double what the original Honda contacts are rated for. As a result, I don't think I've had any of these reported as failed in all the years that I've been selling them. Not a great business decision. I should have just sold the crap ones and just kept selling replacements, but unfortunately the ones I sold tend to last longer than you do. So the only ones I've had fail is where people will put the relay into a socket that is contaminated with dirt or grease or something, and you get some resistance in between the contacts and the socket. And when you get a lot of current going through, that resistance will build up heat to the point where sometimes that heat is enough that it will actually melt the socket or the relay or both. So do make sure that when you replace the relays that the sockets, both in the bike, well, obviously the relays are clean, they're brand new, but make sure the sockets in the bike are not contaminated with anything. Okay, so the other issue is with this 7-volt regulator. This is a regulator for the 4-cylinder wings. What happens is on the 4-cylinder wings, the fuel and temperature gauges require a constant voltage in order to give you an accurate reading. Well, there is no such thing as a constant voltage on a Goldwing because they have a stator. So the voltage of the bus rises and falls depending on the RPM of the engine. When you're at idle, it's probably only putting about 11.8, 11.9 volts out. When you're at, highway cruising speeds, it's putting out 14.2 volts. So if you're trying to use that as a reference to move the fuel and temperature meters, that's not going to work, because when you rev up the engine, the meters are going to peg. And in fact, that's what happens when these regulators fail, and they do fail. So what Honda did is they put a 7-volt regulator that takes whatever voltage coming into it and transforms it into a steady 7-volt output. And that's what those gauges run off. However, those voltage regulators fail regularly, especially on the older bikes, the GL1000s. And what happens when they fail? One of two things. Either both the temperature and the fuel gauges go to 0 and quit working, or they peg all the way up, both of them. That's really dangerous, because now you're putting full 14 volts into them, into meters that are actually expecting 7, and you can actually burn out those meters. So if you start seeing that happening in your bike, and it might be intermittent at first, it's time to get a new 7-volt regulator. Now, if only one gauge fails, if the fuel's working but the temperature's not, the problem is not the regulator, the problem is something else. But if both are failing, it's usually the regulator. And like I said, I've sold thousands of these, and so I've got these in Goldwings all over the world again. Now, the reason for this video is because I got another email from somebody today. This is the 3rd time in about 10 years that this has happened. And if you look on the actual front of the relay, it says, the red is 12 volt input, the green is ground, the black is 7 volt output. Green is always ground in the Honda world, and on the instructions it tells you exactly how to put it in and where to connect it and what the different wires are. And so if you follow the instructions just like 99.999% of the people do, you will have no problem. Your gauges will work, the regulator will work perfectly. However, there are some people who get these things and they look at it and they go, well, duh, he did it wrong because black is always ground. And so they either clip off the terminals or they hook it up wrong. And so instead of following the instructions and looking at what's printed on the thing itself, they look at the colors of the wire and assume that black is ground, that I made a mistake in building them. And yes, I do build these by hand. And then they hook it up backwards and it fries the regulator. And then they email me, say, hey, this doesn't work. I want my money back. And when I get into it with them and I try to understand what happened and why it's not working, it turns out that they didn't follow the instructions and thought they knew better. So don't do that. Follow the instructions. Like I said, thousands of people who've put these in their bikes, they follow the instructions. It works great. That's it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. Click like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching.